This video is sponsored by Alpha Draft, where you can play fantasy esports such as League of Legends, Dota 2, Smite, CSGO. So they'll have Worlds coming up for League of Legends. They've had numerous tournaments, Gfinity, DreamHacks, the majors for CSGO, the Dota 2, they'll have plenty there. Go to the link in the description box below if you'd like to play fantasy esports there for differing amounts of money with the chance to win tens of thousands of dollars, millions are given away. So a topic that's very, very often recycled, revisited, is whether gaming's a waste of time. And as a result, as a subset of gaming, whether esports is a waste of time. And the natural line drawn in the sand is obviously that people who are involved in gaming, people who are involved in esports say, no, it's not a waste of time. Of course it isn't. Look at these numbers. Look at these things we're accomplishing. Look at these big tournaments. Look at this stadium that we've filled. People on the other line, side of the line, whether jokingly or seriously, I mean, obvious examples recently are Colin Cowherd, the guy who was at ESPN, I think it was, who didn't kind of appreciate the value that gaming could have as esports rather could have as a viable sport, or didn't think it was comparable. Jimmy Kimmel made these videos where he poked a bit of fun at gaming and people got really mad at it. So basically, here's the problem. Gaming is a waste of time, both literally and metaphorically, within the context that the argument is nearly always drawn from both sides of people. So from the people who are against it, the people who think they're in favor of it, and they give all these reasons. The way that they've set the context and narrative, even the people on the side of esports being not a waste of time and gaming not being a waste of time, it is a waste of time if you actually look at their own arguments. Because think of it, the main narrative that is pushed to sell the idea that gaming and esports as a subset of gaming is not a waste of time always comes back to esports. And the way you sell it goes like this. It says, since there's the possibility to go pro, and by going pro, not only make a living, therefore sustain yourself just from being a pro gamer, being really good at playing the game, and then since being really good at playing the game, that just means playing the game also go pro and win lots of money, so maybe make even more than you would have made as another job that the same person with the same skill set could have got if they pursued traditional job career path avenues. That makes it no longer a waste of time, and therefore proves that it's of value, that it is not a waste of time. Proves to parents, proves to concerned members of society, proves to people in traditional roles where they say, no, go the safe approach, take this sort of thing. That narrative set up that way is propped up by storylines like this young Dota 2 player, the EG player, Sumail, who plays the 2 position, who's a very talented player. It's one of the stars of the team and has now earned millions because they won DAC and they won the International this year. So he's earned millions despite only being a teenager. It's propped up by guys like Bjergsen, who is a superstar in the West, has accomplished a lot in terms of Western accomplishments, made a lot of money from streaming. So even just his streaming's making him probably more money than he'd make in a normal job. In CSGO, we've got someone like Olof M, who's won a bunch of majors. He's probably already broken the prize money record for this year. He's making a very high salary as well. We know some of the top CSGO players make up to $3,000 a month just base salary. Then they're making the sticker money. Then they're making prize money. Then they're making anything streaming alongside that. Maybe merchandising. I'm not sure how that breaks down. So all of these examples go into being the best, epitomizing the idea that it's not a waste of time. It proves that this is a viable path. It's not a waste of time. You make money, you become famous. There's a structure there. There's tournaments that are taking place in stadiums with all lights, just like a real traditional sporting event. Therefore, of course, it's not a waste of time, right? Problem is, first and foremost, that narrative doesn't work even on its own grounds, because the way it's always misapplied, and when I say misapplied, I mean when you go through it logically, the way people normally apply it, they intend it to be this way, is the notion that because those people I just mentioned make incredible amounts of money, have viable jobs, are productive in a sense, they're creating entertainment for people, they're taking their job is on the stage, has the platform of traditional sports and huge celebrity at this point in time with a lot of people watching, because all of these factors are there, in some way that's supposed to relate to the 99.99 recurring percent of people who are gamers and esports gamers, even smaller subset of that, who will never accomplish any of those goals or make anything approaching reasonable money for what they could have made in a traditional job path using the same amount of time, or relative to the time they spent that could have been used in another area to either make money from another art form or from another traditional job. We can think of whatever we want, a part-time job, even something as simple as the obvious old examples, working at McDonald's, flipping burgers, whatever it may be. Obviously, none of those examples give any credence or back up in any way that it's not a waste of time to be a gamer in that context. That is definitely, in that context, it's more of a waste of time to do the games and play the games and to be a programmer even, and not be the outliers, than it is to just go and do any of those things. If your value is money, and that's how you're judging waste of time, which is what a lot of people are doing here, it is a waste of time. That's not even really debatable. On a literal level, it's the case. On a metaphorical level, it's even the case. So when parents and critics, who are most of the people who this narrative is supposed to address and say, you were wrong, and you look at how wrong you are, and you notice they always go super hard on interviews with top pros about the idea that, like, they love it when a parent was, like, against it. They were like, you won't make it in life, you know, and then the guy proved them wrong, and it's almost like, look, see, parents don't know. This is a real sport. Kids of the world, you can just spend all day playing games, and maybe you could make it as a pro. So when they tell you to get your grades and stuff, they're just all stuck in the muds, you know, they're behind the times. Their history will remember they were on the wrong side. No, they're probably in 99.99 recurring cases correct. It is a waste of your time in that context. So if you're going to address it on that context, you've got to be reasonable. So when parents, when critics of that sort of thing speak against it in terms of productivity for the person's life and the likelihood of them being successful in social context of, like, having shelter, having a job to do, something productive, being able to provide for themselves, being able to buy things that you need in society to live a normal life, actually they're correct. They're more in line, even though they don't know anything about gaming. It's true. They don't understand that people, that a rare few make millions and have all the success. They don't know that stuff, but it's actually irrelevant. And so to present that as that's the norm is a ludicrous proposition. There's also the fact that this whole thing of taking the pro aspect and conflating it with the casual guy who's playing the same amount of hours as Bjergsen, but then is sat on his couch eating Cheetos afterwards and doesn't do anything except maybe work a very simple job, or is failing his exams. He's not doing anything productive in life. And in fact, for him, gaming is just an escape in terms of procrastination to not address the real problems of his life, which is like, I don't have a path of what I want to do in my life. I'm not even really succeeding at the things I'm forcing myself to do, like some sort of schooling or a very basic job. So I'm not going anywhere in that sense. He is literally wasting his life with the game. Now then, it's not the game's fault. He'd probably waste his life with something else. Maybe he'd be playing slot machines, or he'd be watching horse racing, or he'd be playing Magic the Gathering, whatever it would be. It's not the game's fault that's a waste of time, but he is, by definition, wasting his time with the game. And esports, as a result, is a more hardcore way to waste and procrastinate your life in that sense, if we're using this narrative, remember. Now then, also, it's worth pointing out, it's kind of a bit deceptive in as much as I haven't stated anything that's incorrect or doesn't fit with my philosophy. But because you guys who are doing this stuff have set the narrative so ridiculously and so out of bounds of reason, and then create this whole fictional world where you live over here and you have cognitive dissonance to the reality of the situation, it makes it seem like I'm now going to do the old switcheroo and pull the rug from under you when I say, actually, yeah, gaming's a waste of time, esports is a waste of time, but you know what? Every hobby is a waste of time. Because first of all, when it's a hobby, it's not your job. So we've taken care of all the outliers there, the super duper pros and the guys doing all that. Now we're talking about people who do it for fun. Things you do just for fun and enjoyment are by definition a waste of time. There's no productivity beyond what they themselves generate, as in the fun that you get from doing the thing is the product. So the heat that you get from making this fire here, that's what is enjoyed in this metaphor as the enjoyment of it. After that, there's nothing there but a bunch of ash and a bunch of burned up wood that you can't use for anything else. There's not anything special comes from that. We all understand this, I'm sure, inherently, yet it's being misapplied elsewhere, and people are presenting this really weird thing that's obviously to do with validation in their mind and insecurities about the way they were treated in the past and ways to get back at people in their lives who they feel have treated them unfairly. All of that shit's getting muddying up what should be a fairly simplistic issue. Now then, with that said, as you might understand, there's a great saying that says something along the lines of like, nothing you enjoy doing is wasted time. That's obviously the case, isn't it? If you enjoy reading a book, it doesn't matter if you're never going to use the information or the ideas that come from that story in anything meaningful in your life. The enjoyment was to read the book, was to relax, to allow creativity, to allow your mind to go somewhere else for a little while, to take stress out of your life, maybe to even creatively construct something in your own mind just for the pleasure of seeing what entertainment, what art is capable of. These obviously have their own intrinsic value. So in that sense, they're not a waste of time. But in the traditional sense, of course, they're a waste of time. We all understand this. Now then, the real problem here is obviously how do we define a waste of time? Now, unfortunately, because people are addressing it like, but now that some pros are making money, we don't think it's a waste of time. And look, we've got proof it isn't. You're buying into their world. That's their argument. Remember that if it doesn't make money, you don't have a job doing it, it's a waste of time. You're attacking it on exactly the wrong grounds, because you're actually seeding the initial ground. Here's the thing, from day one, if there was no pro gamers, you could have been able to say, as long as you lived a reasonable life where you were able to have shelter, have something to do elsewhere in your life to sustain yourself, you could always have just said all the things I'm saying in the video now. Well, yeah, it is a waste of time. So is you watching a soap opera. So is you watching a sport. But you know what? We all do it as something to have time off, something to enjoy ourselves, something to allow the creative side of our minds to maybe just go at play while the physical aspect that has to do very basic productive things within the tangible world is at rest. You could have gone from that point, and you never need to seed any ground. But in saying no, but you do make money from it. You've accepted their premise, seeded all of the ideological ground that never needed to be given up. Because guess what? Nobody has to say, listening to classical music and playing an instrument is not a waste of time, because like there's a philharmonic orchestra makes like top money, and you know that thousands of people watch them, and they're considered like critically acclaimed as like really high level musicians. That has nothing to do with whether some guy for fun likes to play a bit of the violin or listen to a bit of Beethoven, you know, while he's doing the dishes or something. He doesn't have to argue from that perspective. He could argue just on the merits of the thing itself and the concept of just enjoying yourself and doing something that's meaningful to you. And that's the whole point. If you make money the defining characteristic, then you're going to be fucked in this sense that you'll make that small point, seed all the other ground, and then someone could eventually, what's funny is initially you're only winning in as much as they just hear that like, all right, there's people making a lot of money. Oh, okay, I guess you're right then. You're not, because when eventually they do learn more about it and it does get bigger, they're going to go, oh, but wait a minute, but you're not the one making that money, so actually I'm right again, and now you haven't got any grounds to go on because you've accepted our premise. Just like in the real world, we all know some kid who's from the hood does go on to make it in basketball and make millions, but that doesn't mean when the other kid is failing all his school and he's smoking weed and he's just playing basketball all day and he's not even that good, that when he goes home and his mum's like, oh, will you stop wasting your time doing that and get a job? He's like, yep, but I could be Kobe next month. It's like, well, his mum's gonna be like, no, you won't. That's very unlikely. So that's not a good basis to argue from. No, it's instead he was like, oh, yeah, you're right about all that stuff, but I'm just doing the basketball for fun. Obviously, then that's a different argument, isn't it? It's not that basketball's the waste of time, it's that he's wasting his time and basketball's one way he is doing so, and maybe he does it too much. It's a totally different argument to have. So money is not the defining characteristic, as we can all understand. I mean, we all know it doesn't define what's worthwhile on some intrinsic level because of how it affects art. Yes, it's great if art, a movie, music, literature makes a lot of money and the guy is able to have a full-time job, and as a result he's able to succeed even more and he makes something out of it, so there's an extra product created beyond the enjoyment, the appreciation of the art, and even just, again, wasting time, procrastinating, just having distraction beyond the value that those things have. We all know that there's value beyond that in art, isn't it? To create something special, something meaningful, something that lasts. Okay, so one of my favorite movies is a movie that came out, I think it was in 2006, called The Fountain. And I knew this movie when it came out. I watched it. It was a really brilliant movie. It's a great piece of art that's very well constructed and it flows incredibly well. And the way the storylines tied together is really beautifully done. But when it came out, I remember it didn't have like a wide cinema screening showing in the UK. And I remember looking up a few years later, and actually it's a commercial failure. The box office budget for this, no, the budget rather for this movie was something like 35 million. And yet when I looked it up, the max it had made at the box office was 10 million. So even just in terms of direct money made, it was at a minus 25 million for overall there. And that's ignoring advertising, extra money paid for other things. Now, maybe one day, if you wait long enough, maybe on DVD or something, it could break even or it could maybe make a slight profit. But right now, that movie was a waste of time for the cinema to produce. Except was it? Because if it was a brilliant movie and it's a brilliant piece of art, it has intrinsic value in its own there. So if someone said that was a waste of time, you would never even need to get to the money, to the bottom line of that, or the fact that some of these people are professional actors. You'd never even need to get there. 99% of the whole argument is in the value that is intrinsic within it itself and its own merits as a movie and as something to create and as something to do. At the same time, if you were willing to accept the other person's premise that unless it makes money on that, you'd have to actually go, yeah, it is a waste of time. But who would do that? I don't know anyone who appreciates art who would do so. So as a result, value and validation are to be generated internally. They don't come from external. You don't look and say to someone who has nothing to do with it, oh, validate me that this was worthwhile what I did. If you do so, you're going to end up in a fucked up world where you're going to actually be doing things that society classes as not a waste of time, but actually aren't particularly meaningful to you and your life. And one day when you're dead, you will have just wasted that part of your time, except not even in the context of wasting your time in the way you enjoyed in any possible success. That's the problem. Whenever people talk about money as though it was the ultimate currency for what is meaningful in this world, but he made X amount of money, therefore whatever he did was worthwhile, it was worth doing or whatever. Well, obviously not, because here's the stupidest part about that sort of a metric, is that in general, unless you're investing it in some special way which somehow makes money back, money is eventually spent. So whatever money you have, eventually you don't have. So that's actually got a time component on it where it's quite limited. So even if someone's making $1 million doing something that you wouldn't enjoy, or you could make 10,000 doing something you do enjoy. Here's the thing. When he makes that million, maybe he goes and spends $1 million on something you wouldn't enjoy anyway, and you think it's a bunch of bullshit and a waste of money anyway. Therefore, he didn't really gain anything according to your metric, your internal validation and valuing system. Meanwhile, the 10,000 you make, you might spend on something that's really valuable to you and has incredible intrinsic meaning and significance in your life. Therefore, the 10,000 was actually worth more than the $1 million. Therefore, whatever it took to do the 10,000 and earn, to you has more value and was less of a waste of time than what he did to earn the $1 million. That's why it's so overrated to just make money if it's not attached to doing something meaningful and valuable to you in your life. Because in reality, time is the only true currency. That's why there's a threshold on how much money it's worth even making. Because once you've made it to the point where you've got like a house, a roof over your head, heating, yeah, joke's on you, Alpha Draft, give me more money. Then food, transportation. Once you've got these basics, once you've hit that threshold, making more only has value in as much as you can buy slightly nicer coat. See what I did there? You could buy a nicer computer to go to alphadraft.com and play fantasy esports. You don't actually need that good a computer. Anyone on any computer can play, believe it or not, just as long as you have a browser. Don't use Internet Explorer unless they pay me. So maybe they want an esports version, I don't know. So there's also basically, once you hit that threshold of making a certain amount, anything extra has to, again, in itself, justify itself in terms of why it's worth making that much more money. What more can you do with that? Because the problem is, a lot of things that can make you a lot would not be considered a waste of time at all. That could make you a lot of money. Think about some really high pressure jobs that are incredibly difficult. They might not even be that satisfying and enjoyable in themselves, but you could make a lot of money if you kill yourself doing this job. But we all understand the concept that that's going too far the other way, isn't it? Now you're making all this money, but what time do you have to spend it? When you do have time off, are you so stressed that you have to blow it on things that are just too exorbitant and you're not even really enjoying that much because it's just assuaging the absolute crushing guilt and pressure and turmoil that you have to go through to get the money? We all understand in that sense that actually the real currency there is time, isn't it? It's great to have all the other things, but you need enough time to enjoy these things. You need time to waste, to procrastinate sometimes, to just enjoy artistic endeavors other times, to express yourself in some way. We can all understand this basic thing. The biggest problem also with the money aspect is it was a lame narrative anyway from day one, and it doesn't work even to this day. Like, they always, first and foremost, if it was really the case that this was the way it was, then why did they have to overrate the whole story? Why did they have to sell it that it's not just that this one guy made the millions, but it's like, hey, gamers now are making millions. Therefore, hey, mums and dads, don't say it's just a waste of time playing games all night because this kid's making millions. Well, we all know that's not a reasonable narrative, don't we? The only person you can sell that as a reasonable narrative is the guy who doesn't know that much about it anyway. So all you're doing is tricking that guy with a bunch of snake oil salesman bullshit that's not the case. There's also the factor that if that's really the case, that there is all this money-wise validation and value to be had in gaming that makes it not a waste of time, and esports not a waste of time, it's a small subset, then why have they always lied about it? Why did they take esports and try and conflate that with overall gaming numbers? Like, oh, 4 billion was made in gaming. Oh my God, then esports must be valuable. That's like a fraction of that, isn't it? Even when you then go into gaming, why do they always have to talk about like the $10 million for whatever it is for the Dota 2? Well, that was, I guess, the year before. $10 million purse for Dota 2. Why would you say that? You'd say what the prize for first place is, isn't you? They're competing for $10 million. No, they're not, mate. They're competing for the share of it. That's the first place. We all know that. Again, why do you have to do that? It tells you that there's something going on here. An insecurity, an external validation is being sought because even the person telling the story thinks to themselves, but even $1 million for the top player, that's not that much. So we have to make it sound vaguely like maybe he's competing for 10 million, because if someone hears 10 million, they go, wait a minute, 10 million? That's sort of like what a top sportsman would be going for. Oh, wow, that means it's got equal value. See, there's something suspicious going on where even the best case scenario argument is like that. Same with the viewing figures. The viewing figures are amazing. I did like a tournament the other day that wasn't even the biggest CSGO tournament, and it had some like 200k concurrents watching like the biggest match. Well, instead of just saying, wow, a tournament that wasn't even the biggest, has 200k concurrent for a CSGO LAN. Instead, people have to go, oh no, look, the whole of the International 5 had more viewing figures than one game of the NBA Finals, which is like, obviously that's an absolutely disingenuous stat. Because why would you take an entire tournament that lasted 2 weeks with games on every single day all the way through the day with one game that lasted on one day, a couple of hours on one night, when it was a part of a similar tournament that lasts like a month with loads of matches? See, it's totally disingenuous. There's something going on here. Now then, here's another interesting concept for you. When people do value what is a waste of time and what isn't, I think they have a really skewed way and they do it. Not just in terms of the money aspect and in terms of the amount of time that something spends, but because they have this weird criteria where the idea is, I mean, you've probably heard it before, like say you're doing something and you're accomplishing a lot, someone could always come up, right, and they could go, but you're hardly saving lives, are you, mate? You're going to find the cure for cancer doing that. You're not like a doctor who's out there doing all these things. Here's an interesting concept, something I thought of a long time ago in my own life when I was trying to think of what should someone do with their life. Just not just me directly, but in a sense, I was thinking about my own life. But then I was thinking about the greater perspective of what each of us can do in society. And so I thought to myself, what really is the noblest path that a person can pursue in terms of a job or something to try and accomplish? Is it, obviously to become a doctor, you could literally immediately, as soon as you have those skills, go and start helping people who need physical help right now. As some kind of a psychiatrist or psychologist, you could help people who have a mental issue, help them to overcome that and live a more fulfilling life. You could do charity work and get food and medicine out to people. Obviously, we can see these have very obvious, tangible, intrinsic value attached to them, okay? So it would seem like, right, that's what we should do. That is the best thing a person could do. But actually, I think that's a quite naive way to look even at life in terms of what's productive as a career path or expression of ourselves in a productive sense, what we mean by productive. Because first of all, there can only be so many people can be the doctor, can be the charity worker, can be the psychiatrist or psychologist. So only so many people can do those jobs, and only so many people would be in terms of skill set suited to do them well. So it wouldn't make sense for somebody who wouldn't have the skill set to do that as his job, even if in theory he could help people. Because what if he could help people elsewhere in another way? And what I realized was, actually, another way, first of all, if you really wanted to be very pedantic, the actual best way to change the world and make the biggest impact would never be to be like a doctor. Like the doctor who goes and treats, let's say in his life, he treats 1,000 people and helps them. That's great, he's helped 1,000 people. But if that same guy had a skill set which would have been better applied to trying to find a cure for some terrible illness or make some technological innovation which indirectly ended up saving millions of lives, well, even on that metric of how to help people tangibly in real life, he would have done more good for the world and had a better impact on the world than what is the most obvious initial shortcut approach to having the most help. That's an obvious one. Likewise, it goes to another level. So it might seem like, well, obviously, to be like a rock musician, just taking drugs and doing concerts all the time, or to be a comedian, just cracking a few jokes and making fun of some politician, obviously those could never be as noble paths as the other ones, right? So essentially, art and entertainment. Well, actually, of course they could, because you know what? The guy who is the doctor, who's doing the incredible surgery that takes so much precision and skill, and he has to dedicate his life to it, but he's helping people, and the guy who's cracking the code for some virus to help save the world in some way, those guys need to have time off as well. They have a normal life, remember. They work, they come home, they have a family, they have stresses, they have all these things. They need entertainment, they need time off, they need to waste their time, therefore they need something to fill that time. Now, if everyone's a doctor, everyone's a there's no one to do that. No one can be that pressure release valve psychically on society. Therefore, we need people who are amazing at being stand-up comedians, at being musicians who express through music the very soul, the very murmurings of the soul, of how people think and what they secretly hold inside as their visualizations of dreams of life, but they can't express through their work because maybe their work is something as mundane as they have to do this or they have to do that, something that doesn't have a lot of artistic expression within it. Not only that, we all know even these people, when you're talking to them, the reason why people talk about musicians and they say, oh, he changed my life, man, or whatever, and then you hear the story and you're like, wow, how did he change your life, mate? It's because those people need inspiration. They need things that they can look at. They need to see that someone else is doing something in a certain way, that in their very minor way, in some other way of life, they can be like, yeah, I'm trying to do a similar thing myself. That's the way I'm expressing myself. That's who I am as a person, to even define my personality and understand where I am in the world. All these things are needed, and that's another subsection. So that has value. And so as a result, what have we got to at the end here? Basically, everything has value, and everything's a waste of time to a degree. All depends how you define the argument. The way it's being defined at the moment is quite disingenuous, and to some degrees is just bullshit. But when you define it reasonably, suddenly we've got come full circle. Gaming obviously isn't a waste of time, and esports isn't a waste of time. It depends, what was that time going to be used for? What do you count as productive? Is it something you're procrastinating from, in which case you're kind of admitting yourself it's something that you're wasting time with? Is it something you're doing just as your allotted time to enjoy yourself, to express yourself? Is it something that one day, because you've got a talent for it and you have a passion for it, you can make a little bit of money doing it? Or you can make a lot of money doing it if you're a very, very rare outlier? Whether you make a little or a lot, that will never define whether it was a waste of time or not, in a reasonable sense, when we look at how you would normally apply that kind of phraseology. Now, if you apply it another way, obviously it is. At the end of the day, one day we'll all be dead. One day, everything, practically everything, any of us, you or me, watching or talking about this video now, ever do, will be forgotten, will have, in the most broad context, no value, no meaning, there'll be no context even to speak of. But today is a different matter, and the next few hours are a different matter. And ultimately, whether you make 10 pence from the next hour, or you make no pence, but you do something that for you is valuable, or for you would have been spelt elsewhere on other procrastinations, such as with society has a myriad of, then that's really all that matters, right? The internal validation, the internal value structure is there, defined by you. And so don't buy into someone else's paradigm, especially not if you're going to do it with a faulty argument, which one day eventually will be reasoned through by these people, and they'll see that you were wrong, and actually you'll have ceded the very ground that you should have been defending if you really thought it wasn't a waste of time. So thanks to AlphaDraft for the money, making this not a waste of my time. See what I did there? Oh, I've turned it all around on myself. What have I done? This video has mad value whether it makes any money or not, but still, please do pay me.